Rick Hartford was in a curious state of mind. The closest word he could find to describe it didn't seem to fit his mood. He kept coming back to the word depressed seriously. That's depressed. He's dejected, though not to say depressed. In fact, some part of him is relieved, but can't agree with the time-honored statement that it's better to know now than after. What bothers him most is his inability to move beyond all of this. Is this some kind of fog? Or maybe a bout of motor excitement with mental confusion and memory impairment, or just the usual everyday lingering insanity? No wonder he kept coming back to the word depressed. Everything around him seemed so pale and featureless, as if all the colors stop. Where the hell am I? Rick slowed his step and stopped when he realized that he had unknowingly, at least at first glance, walked into a rather strange and bewilderingly chaotic store, or storage room, or whatever it was. Looking around, he found nothing to suggest that it was anything other than a room filled with all sorts of curious objects and curiosities with no apparent order or organization. Things everywhere. This was an attack. His senses were overwhelmed by the multitude of stimuli. He shook his head to air it out, and feeling that he had already switched into survival mode, he turned around and walked back out into the street. Once on the sidewalk, he looked at the door. Then at the large display case next to the door, where it read, "Amorous Goods is a specialty store offering everything erotic, attractive, and even romantic. Here you will find all sorts of items, whether exotic, unusual, mystical, or otherwise altered in nature." He shook his head in silent bewilderment. Only here in San Francisco, in the city in Baghdad Bay, could one find such a store. It was not even in the Castro. But after thinking about it, he decided that this intriguingly strange establishment deserved attention. A small sign hung next to the door. Customers must be at least 18 years old, or with similar experience. This place definitely had a San Francisco vibe to it. He entered the store again, drawn more by genuine curiosity than a desire to buy anything. As he looked around again, he noticed that the store was actually much larger than he had originally realized. The feeling of strangeness hadn't changed visually, orally, or in terms of scent. From somewhere far away, out of invisibility, the tinkling of bells reached him, apparently accompanied by the monotonous sounds of an Indian vestibule. And from some distant corner came the strange sounds of Asiatic music, as if someone were strumming or striking the strings, which were so faint that he felt an irresistible urge to move towards them, to hear them better. But suddenly the sounds stopped, and he was perplexed to realize that for some reason he was standing in a strange place. What was this place? The shop smelled strangely old, but on top of that stale, if not ancient mustiness, was the scent of fresh spices and a soft floral perfume that was more suggestive than gardenia-like. And what was that gusty whiff of something surprisingly feminine? He had no idea, but with each step he caught himself expecting something, or at least hoping to encounter the source. Then he stopped again, turning on the spot, perplexed as to who it was and where it was coming from. Yet he realized unmistakably that someone was watching him. He hoped that someone was a woman, young, curious, sexy. Damn it, he was horny. And it was more than obvious that he was stuck in a state of constant wretched pause. Had it really been months? Oh shit, months without sex. That was the problem, wasn't it? Not since he broke up with Cynthia. Cynthia, the crazy bitch he'd been with for most of the past year, the woman he'd seriously considered marrying. Cynthia, in the midst of his attempts to convince her to move with him to another city, where they could explore the possibilities of a long-term, if not lifelong, relationship, had dropped the ball quite unexpectedly. What about Greg and Les? What about them? Why do you care? They're perfectly capable of finding a new roommate. But honey, what about me when you're not around? Well, Greg and Les are always available, always ready. Where else am I going to find two guys like that? Rick was stunned when Cynthia began to explain that Greg and Les weren't just his roommates. How not just? Rick hated having to find out irrefutable details, but he couldn't help but ask if Cynthia is implying what he suspects. Well, they're more like roommates with benefits. Oh, don't worry, they're nothing like you. You're special, Rick, you're my boyfriend. But when you're not with me, are you saying that when I'm not with you, you're with them? Sexually? You have sex with both of them? Well, not at the same time, Rick. What do you take me for? Okay, wait, if you're talking about both of them, there have been a couple of occasions when they've both had sex with me at the same time. But all of those instances involved a lot of drinking. Baby, my boyfriend is you and only you. But Rick, I know how much your job means to you. You love your job and you work long hours, plus you travel a lot. So it makes sense that when you're unavailable, So you're saying that when I'm not available, you sleep with my roommates. So last week when I was in Seattle, you slept with Greg and Les? I have needs, Rick. Is it just sex? Or do you want me to suffer when you're gone? No, of course you don't want that. You're actually one of the good guys. Seriously, honey, there's no way I would date Greg or Les, she said with a fair amount of pride. So you're not dating them in any way? You're just sleeping around? The fact that she confirmed this fact with a hopeful look on her face told him everything. It's over, Cynthia. Forget I ever suggested it. How could he not see any of this? He in no way felt that anything was wrong. That was the bone stuck in his heart. He didn't have the slightest clue, nothing. Hell, he'd been with her for almost a year. What the hell? God, he needed a drink. Is there a bar nearby? Whatever's going on with Cynthia is her fault. It's time to let it go. It's time to get back on the horse, get back in the saddle. Maybe there was a bar around here somewhere. He wouldn't be surprised. This place seemed to have a little bit of everything. The shelves seemed like a collage or collision of different retail ideas, like a collection of vintage clothing and accessories, odd sculptures, paintings and tapestries, furniture, books, and God knows what else that may have once been lost, but now found and was now here and poetically available. Rick walked past a large, battered and scratched, but clearly working samovar that was warm, with jets of steam rising up and out. Several assorted teapots dangled, hooked on their handles, and glass teacups of Russian design, as well as Chinese and English porcelain cups, were spread across the table. Jars half filled with tea of various shades and textures stood in their places. Strange. He paused to inspect the surprisingly complex-looking espresso machine with dials and gauges, curved tubes and valves that seemed to have more in common with the bizarre fantasies of a converted steampunk rocket ship. And judging by the aromas hovering around it, someone somewhere was baking something. What a delightful aroma. Obviously there was no indication of what else might be here, or if any of the items could even be purchased. Oddly enough, however, he didn't see a single price tag anywhere. Seriously, Rick hadn't seen a single indication of the price of any item. No articles, no tags, no stickers, no promotional posters, nothing. He wondered. How does one make a purchase here? He went deeper into the store, walked down the aisle, looked to the right for a moment, then back, and found himself at a dead end. He walked back, turned down the nearest aisle, and found himself in front of a display case of men's hats of various styles. Cowboy hats, Homburgs, a too-high cylinder, a bowler with a purple hat band, various Panamas, too many identical straw canotiers, and one fedora. The gorgeous, stylish, but clearly unworn gray fedora sat lonely on a simple hat stand on a separate little shelf. He reached out and almost touched it. "May I help you, sir? Please note the many signs urging customers to ask for help." Some of the items are very fragile. Would you like to see this hat? There's a whole story behind it. Rick turned and looked at the woman next to him in considerable amazement. How could it be that he hadn't seen or heard her approach? While it was puzzling, perhaps even confusing, he shouldn't have given it too much thought, perhaps. Nice hat. Though I must admit that I don't tend to wear hats as a fashion accessory, more fond of utilitarian or sporty hats. But there is something about this hat. Rick spoke calmly but was actually looking for a way to avoid the woman. And where might be the shortest way out of here? He glanced at the hat and couldn't help but notice that the woman was wearing a dress obviously made up of various veil-like scarves, and the effect created was much more seductively transparent than the usual opaque. My God, he could clearly make out her entire chest. The woman was quite attractive, tall, slender, with long black hair braided into a casual French braid. She radiated a slight wariness, as if left unattended he might damage something. Are you, in general, interested in crime dramas from the 40s, 50s? Cool detective novels, men with flexible morals and deliciously appetizing women who are hopelessly attracted to them? People suffer because of their choices and the dangerous situations they get themselves into, but they always suffer in a very classy way. Naturally. A wonderful, just wonderful, nothing like a brilliant answer. Is she really flirting with him? Saying deliciously appetizing girls who are hopelessly attracted to them. She licked her lips and tilted her head slightly, which made him look at her hidden breasts again. Rick tried to rise to her level of flirtation. Actually, I'd like to talk about deliciously appetizing girls and the men who are attracted to them. Rick searched inquisitively for her name tag, but only succeeded in getting a closer look at her breasts. Miss or Mrs.? So can you tell me about the hat? Can I try it on? Maybe? Rick sensed that she had an unmistakable suspicion that he was up to no good. In his defense, he tried to smile casually, but felt it was more like an unspoken taunt. The backstory of this hat dates back to the golden age of Hollywood. Unfortunately, we are unable to authenticate the many racy stories associated with it, and if we could, its price would be much higher. However, we have been told, and I personally believe this to be true, that the hat in question is actually the same fedora worn by Humphrey Bogart in the classic movie Deep Sleep. Rick felt his head involuntarily pull into his shoulders and his smile curve to the side. It occurred to him that this clerk, saleswoman, or whoever was just a pretty doll. At that moment, the doll shuddered and a surprising wave ran across her breasts. It was heard that she swallowed before continuing. You may remember that the movie Deep Sleep was made in 1945. It was based on Raymond Chandler's 1939 short story of the same name. Humphrey Bogart was invited to play the role of Private Detective Philip Marlowe, one of Raymond Chandler's best characters. Unlike his hero, Philip Marlowe, Bogart had a reputation, deserved or not, as a great lover of the ladies. It is largely based on numerous accusations made by Bogart's third wife, Mayo Method. The latter was convinced that her husband regularly and successfully slept with a huge number of Hollywood's most beautiful young actresses. And in this particular film, there are many young, beautiful women perfect for apocryphal stories about his blatantly amorous escapades, including, but not limited to, his eventual fourth wife, Lauren Bacall, whom he married shortly after his divorce from Miss Method. Miss Bacall played the role of Vivian Rutledge, a widow with a reputation as a lover of male society. There is speculation that he probably slept with Doherty Malone, who played a bookstore clerk with glasses, in a scene involving their amorous encounter in a downpour. There was incredible chemistry between her and Mr. Bogart on screen. It is also implied that he had various sexual encounters with other women in the film, including Martha Vickers, who played Carmen, the Sternwoods' youngest daughter. Oh, she had some delightfully racy lines in the dialogue. My favorite line about Carmen's behavior, though, was uttered by Mr. Bogart in a conversation with the Sternwoods' butler. Yes, I dated her. She tried to sit on my lap while I was standing. There are rumors, and they are unfortunately only rumors, that Bogart had at least one sexual encounter with multiple partners. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there are no memoirs, no diary entries, no photographs, no joint testimonies, nothing. There is simply no definitive evidence, and yet there are an unusually large number of thundering rebuttals for the sake of preserving reputations by each of the people I just referenced. Rick noticed that during her cinematic lecture, this as yet unnamed woman shifted her hat from one hand to the other, so that Rick's gaze was directed at her, and took the opportunity to put her other arm around his back to keep him from moving away. As a result, his hand was between her breasts and the back of his palm was touching the front of her pelvis. Could he really feel the radiant, moist heat of her arousal? Her nearness and intimate scent excited him to the point of horror. Supposedly, this hat had been purchased specifically for deep sleep, and every time Bogey wore it, one or more of the women present would soon satisfy his carnal needs. Though I must remind you that there was no actual proof. Usually when all the participants in these movie romances pass away, all sorts of sexually scandalous information pops up. Look at poor Grace Kelly. Since her death, hundreds and hundreds of stories have surfaced about how she was unrestrainedly sleeping around. It's well known in the industry that the poor woman was incapable of keeping her knees drawn up, and her panties in place. Rick dropped all pretense and turned to the woman. Wow, that's quite a hat. If it held such sexual power, how did it end up here? Scott held the hat above his head but looked directly at the saleswoman. That's a separate and unique story. Supposedly it was taken from the set by Miss Bacall and kept for herself. During her affair with Bogey, which likely began during their previous movie, To Have and Have Not, she made him wear it every moment they were together. Once she and Bogey were married in 1946, she hid the hat by stashing it away. Being away from prying eyes, the hat gradually faded from memory, and over time it was forgotten about. It disappeared as if it never existed, leaving behind rumors, innuendo, and too many unchecked erotic fantasies. Around the time of Miss Bacall's passing, various Bogey memorabilia began to appear on the market again. Somehow this hat fell into the hands of one Randall Black. Fortunately, we have a reliable, documented chain of ownership from this point forward. Shortly after the hat was in his hands, the previously unknown Mr. Black gained a very wide and well-documented reputation as an incredibly virile and energetic man in his 60s. Apparently he was quite adept at pleasing the ladies, and those skills, as I said, were well documented through the recollections of his many life companions. Mr. Black clearly did not believe in sexual exclusivity and eventually died with a smile on his face, enjoying the carnal company of 3 female students from a very prominent local university. The salesgirl took the hat and raised it over Rick's head, pressing her breasts and pelvis against him. "Let's see if the hat wants to belong to you, shall we?" When the hat came down on his head, Rick smiled. He liked the way it felt on his head. He looked in the mirror next to him and tilted the hat at a more graceful angle. He turned to ask the saleswoman what she thought about it, but the question died before it could roll off his tongue. He looked at the woman he'd just been talking to, but what he saw now was completely different. She actually radiated desire, a deep burning sexual need radiating from her. God, this woman wants sex, and she wants it now. She wants to be kissed, to be touched, stroked, and caressed. She didn't push him away. No, God. Then she tried to slip her hand between them to grasp his zipper and pull it down. "I want to, damn it. Where's your office?" "This way." She grabbed his hand and pulled him with her. Rick followed, unable to take his eyes off her swaying back as she led him deeper into the store. They hurried past a counter with a cash register, passed through a curtain of strung beads, then turned left into a crazily cluttered office. Once inside, he closed the door and pulled it open. At the last moment, he veered to the side, lifted her arms and pressed her palms against the door in the classic to-be-searched pose. That was the most incredible sex ever. No man has ever made me feel that way before. Thank you. No woman has ever made me finish so many times. She was puzzled by that statement. No man has ever come close to what you just did to me, seriously. Rick was half-dressed. He paused upon hearing the compliment and ran a finger along the brim of his fedora. "I'm very pleased. You may have led me to believe that hat is really very special." Which, oddly enough for Rick, caused the woman to burst into a fit of laughter. Her face reflected clarity and realization. Good God, that hat is a menace. At the mention of the hat, he pointed to it. "How much is it worth?" she said, and he laughed. "Even at double the price, it's still a bargain." "Just one more thing, okay? I want to ask you to do me a very big personal favor." She didn't wait for an answer, and I'm saying this completely sincerely and willingly. Please don't ever come back here again. If you ever see me anywhere, please don't call out to me or come near me. I know this sounds weird and contradictory, maybe even a little crazy, because you can't imagine how much good you've done for me today. Unfortunately, at the same time, you've also put me in front of a problem of epic proportions. I am truly at a loss. So please, from now on, no names, no confessions, nothing, please. Rick paused, holding a wad of tissues in his hand and self-cleaning. He looked at her and sensed her sincerity. "I'll honor your request, Ma'am." He raised his hand and touched the brim of his hat again. She flinched and looked at him anxiously. "And please refrain from, just take the hat with you and be careful wearing it." Once dressed, she escorted Rick to the cash register where the purchase transaction was completed. He thanked the mysterious saleswoman once more and headed toward the front of the store. The front door opened and a very attractive young woman walked in. She was wearing a lavender blazer with a name tag that had the name Vicky on it. Rick held the door for her, nodded as she passed, then left. He really needed a drink, but perhaps a more important priority was a shower. "I see you sold the fedora from Deep Sleep." He looked very handsome in it. "For a good price?" Vicky asked, looking around as she walked to the back of the store. On the shelf, she saw the leather coat Tamara had been wearing earlier, and next to it, her name tag with a badly bent pin with a drop of blood visible on the sharp end. What the hell? She made her way to her office and looked inside. Tamara was kneeling on the floor and wiping something with paper napkins. Vicky gathered air in her chest to question Tamara about what had spilled in here, when her sense of smell picked up the pungent odor of sex. "God, please tell me you didn't." Vicky couldn't even finish her accusation. "Tamara, what's wrong? What are you going to tell Corinne?" "No, don't tell her. What happened was just an accident, that's all. I'll back you up." Tamara threw the tissues in the trash. "Thanks for your concern, Vicky. I may not tell her today, but I'll tell her eventually. Who knows, I may not have a choice. Honestly, Vicky, I think the idea of wearing clothes for sale may not be in our best interest or the best interest of our customers. When you left, I was wearing the knee-length leather coat we talked about yesterday. Knowing that I would be wearing leather today, I decided to wear something lighter and more intimate, so I put this on." She held up her hands and slowly turned around. Vicky stared at the almost transparent material through which Tammy's body could be seen. She even felt a little turned on herself. According to their information, this particular leather coat had belonged to Marlene Dietrich, a Hollywood icon known for her voracious sexual appetite, indiscriminately for men and women. Yes, I was strolling around in my coat and saw him walk in, look around and walk out. Only he didn't leave. He went back into the store and started wandering all over the place. Suddenly, as I decided to follow him, I thought I was about to faint from the heat, and I realized it was the damn coat. Suddenly it was hot to the touch. As I was taking my coat off, my name tag came undone and pierced my finger. There was blood, so I couldn't wear anything else so I wouldn't get blood on it. Then I saw him walking down the Hollywood aisle. The next moment I realized I was standing next to him. We were talking about the hat and all the stories. He tried it on and all of a sudden we started kissing and then we were here and we did it. Many times, repeatedly. Oh, Tamara, I feel awful. I was thinking of wearing some of that stuff. Well, obviously that's a very bad idea. Let's not do it again. That's not all, Vicky, in both positive and negative ways. As you know, I've been off the pill for a long time. I'm at the peak of my fertility right now. His swimmers could be knocking on my egg door right now. Oh, Tamara. There's still more to come, maybe. Corinne and I have been gathering information on local fertility clinics. Tamara turned her attention to Vicky's desk calendar and counted forward 9 months. What are you doing? Vicky asked, counting down 9 months. If I get pregnant, it will be an Easter baby. I know it's too soon to talk about it, but I've got a strange feeling. Well, there I've told you everything, Vicky. He's tall, good-looking, very fit, and well-dressed. All in all, not a bad choice if it all works out. Tamara smiled at her boss with an expression of extreme satisfaction on her face. She ran her hand over her taut tummy and imagined it being inflated by her daughter. Somehow she knew it would. She smiled at Vicky and thought about the name. Esperanza popped into her head and she immediately thought, that's a beautiful name. Rick Hartford wiped his eyes from the excess of last night's pleasantries. He lowered his gaze to the empty bed, noting the small depression beside him. There was still the scent of her arousal on the sheets. He figured she must have left this morning. What was her name? Becky? No. Beverly? Yes, Beverly. He shook his head. And how the hell did she manage to get that kind of favor? And then he hummed. Damn, that was something. He picked up his phone to make a daily entry in his journal. It was a habit he'd started over a year ago and found it to be a very useful way to keep track of his time, activities, thoughts, as well as manage his sex life. The app opened up yesterday, and he patiently checked the boxes and filled in the blanks. Then he wrote, Beverly, met her at the market, took her to dinner, had sex. Total score, 9 points. He clicked done. The Today page opened and the Today page appeared. On this same day earlier, where last year's entry was highlighted, bought a hat at Amorous Goods, promised never to return. It was followed by an entry. Lonely woman, no name, varied and glorious sex, 10+. Lonely woman, no name, promised never to return. He rubbed his face again and turned to where his hat hung on the post by the headboard. He selected search, typed in sex, and filtered the search by year. A list of 446 items appeared. 446 items were people, women with whom he'd had various sexual relationships. He doubted he'd had sex with even 46 women before buying this hat. This hat, the fedora of the gods, he had worn last night. In fact, he's worn it every one of those 365 days. Sometimes, of course, twice a day or more. Like the day he was born, he intended to sleep with as many women as possible in the 24 hours of his 29th birthday. On his birthday, he slept with 8 different women. Although he remembered the number, he couldn't remember any of the names. He'd have to look that information up. He couldn't help but wonder if any of the 8 remembered his name. Rick showered, shaved, and grabbed a bite to eat. An hour later, he was at the UP store, mailing a medium-sized box to his sister in Ontario. The box contained a smaller box with the only contents, a gray fedora. A simple letter said that the smaller box and its contents were to be burned without opening it. After the smaller box and its contents were burned to the ground, please call him. Amusingly, 2 weeks later, an entry appeared in his journal. Feeling free, Natalie must have burned her hat today. 3 hours later, Natalie called. I'm free. Rick opened the door to his girlfriend, Simone. The last 6 months had been great. The connection between them was excellent, and the sex was incredible. She had already met most of his family, and everyone involved immediately expressed their approval. Now it was time for him to meet her family. You'll like my family. My older brothers can be a little overprotective, but they have good intentions. And my mom texted me to say there's going to be a big surprise for me. For us. Oh, here we are. Rick shook everyone's hands and said hello. He was just enjoying a beer with the male contingent when the doorbell rang. There were squeals of surprise and delight, and a crowd of women slowly flowed inside. Rick looked at his companions and received only a shrug in response. Then one of the brothers said, "That must be our cousin. She's married to a woman, and they have a child whose father is unknown. Don't be an ass, Rob." They are happy. Are not hurting anyone, and are excellent parents. You have to admit that Hope is a great kid. I admit I was against this marriage, but I'm not ashamed to say I was wrong. Simone came around the corner. Rick, come here and meet my cousin Tamara, her spouse Corinne, and their 2-year-old daughter Hope. I'm just sure you'll like them.